When A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms began, it felt small, intentionally, confidently small, and I mean that as the highest compliment. For a franchise built on dragons, throne rooms, prophecies, and continent-shaking violence, the boldest move this series makes is stripping away all of that at the start and asking a simpler question. What does honor look like when you don't have power? This isn't a story that opens with spectacle. It opens with a hedge knight digging a grave. The first image isn't a dragon shadow crossing a city. It's dirt under fingernails. It's the sound of a shovel. It's grief that doesn't have an audience. And that choice matters because it tells you what kind of show it's going to be. This series is not trying to out-epic Game of Thrones or out-shock House of Dragons. It's doing something harder. It's trying to make Westeros human again. By episode 6, that small beginning has grown into one of the most emotionally grounded and thematically rich stories this world has delivered in years. Not because it suddenly gets bigger in scale, though the stakes do rise, but because it gets deeper. It digs into what the larger franchise sometimes leaves behind. The meaning of knighthood, the cost of violence, the rot inside dynasties, and the quiet ways legacies begin. Over 6 episodes, the show accomplishes something rare. It tells a story that feels intimate and epic at the same time. A story about a man who doesn't belong in the songs, slowly becoming the kind of person that songs are supposed to be about. So let's walk through the journey, from a grave in the dirt to a road into legend. The premiere does something almost miraculous. It adapts The Hedge Knight with deep respect for George R. Martin's novella while still making smart television adjustments. The balance is not easy. Most adaptations fail in one of two ways. Either they worship the source material so rigidly that the story becomes stiff on screen, or they improve it so aggressively that it loses what made it special in the first place. Episode 1 largely avoids both traps. We open exactly where the novella does, Dunk burying his master, Sir Arlen of Pennytree. In the book, the scene is internal dialogue, Dunk talking to himself in his own head as grief and fear and uncertainty swirl. On screen, that doesn't work, and it's harder to communicate without voiceover. Voiceover is very tricky in fantasy. It can either feel literary or feel like a crutch. So this show makes a small but smart adjustment. Dunk speaks aloud into open air. It's simple, it's lonely, it works. Because Dunk talking out loud doesn't just replace narration, it reinforces character. It shows that Dunk is isolated enough that speaking to no one, or to horses, is normal. That he's emotionally raw enough that silence is unbearable. That he's still halfway a boy playing at adulthood. That single choice establishes tone. Grounded, intimate, character first. And then yes, the poop scene. It's not in the novella, it's entirely a show invention, and even George reportedly wasn't sure about it. You can argue the scene either way. On one hand, it's a blunt declaration that the show is not here to romanticize medieval life. Westeros is gross. Bodies are gross. Travel is gross. The series wants you to smell the mud. On the other hand, it's a risky tone gamble in a premiere that otherwise strives for subtlety. It's the kind of moment that can remind the viewer suddenly that they're watching writers trying to be edgy. But here's the thing, the scene's biggest impact isn't what it says about bodily functions, it's what it does structurally. It breaks the ice. It tells the audience this story is going to be earthy. It's not about kings and gods, it's about people. And then the episode immediately earns that promise. If the poop scene is the crude handshake, the next sequence proves the writers understand the source material deeply. Dunk meeting Egg at the end feels lifted from the pages. The awkwardness, the irritation, the push-pull dynamic between a suspicious hedge knight and a too clever child. This relationship is the engine of the entire story, and episode 1 nails it because it doesn't rush it. Dunk doesn't instantly love Egg. Egg doesn't instantly become noble. They rub each other the wrong way first, the way real people do, and that friction becomes the foundation of later loyalty. Where the show begins expanding in its margins, and mostly for the better, is with Red and Bonnie, your camp followers. And they are definitely not in the novella. Their inclusion addresses one of the most consistent criticisms of The Hedge Knight. It's an intimate story, but it's a story where women rarely exist. Adding them does two important things. One, it makes the world feel fuller. A tourney camp would be filled with people who aren't knights. Two, it adds a layer of commentary. They function like a Greek chorus, offering blunt perspectives that puncture romance. Their comparison of knighthood to sex work is particularly sharp because it reframes chivalry as labor. A knight's Knight's body is a commodity. He performs for crowds, he risks injury for the entertainment of others, and if he breaks, he's discarded. That isn't just a clever line, it's a thesis statement about Dunk. Dunk is not protected by status, he is not cushioned by wealth, his body is the only capital he has. So when a character tells him, "Be kind to your body, last one you're like to have," it stands like a prophecy. Not a magical prophecy, but a practical prophecy. Dunk is going to spend the season learning what it costs to keep getting back up. Then there's Lionel Baratheon, the Laughing Storm, expanded significantly from the book, and he's immediately magnetic. Lionel is playful, charismatic, bordering on flirtatious, and he gives Dunk one of the most important pieces of advice in the season. You're tall. Be tall. It's such a simple line, but it becomes a quiet thesis for Dunk's arc. Dunk's size is his identity, it's his intimidation, it's his armor, it's also his insecurity, because being big doesn't automatically mean being worthy. Lionel's advice is basically, stop apologizing for what you are, stop trying to shrink yourself into acceptability, own it. And the show's deeper connection between Dunk and Lionel adds weight if you know future lore. Decades later, Dunk defeats Lionel in a trial by combat during the Storm King Rebellion. That connection transforms this episode from introduction to long game storytelling. The episode closes on a small but beautiful change. In the novella, Dunk alone sees the falling star and thinks, "The luck is mine alone." In the show, Egg shares it. Egg says the first part and Dunk echoes it. So the luck is ours? From solitude to partnership. That's the story in one line. Episode 2 leans into the mentorship and legacy. It's the episode that starts widening the emotional frame without losing intimacy. We get more Sir Arlen, and thank the Seven for that. In the novella, Dunk remembers Arlen fondly. In the show's earliest depiction, Arlen can feel a bit harsher. Episode 2 corrects that balance by showing the singing, wandering, flawed, but honorable knight who shaped Dunk. That matters because Dunk's moral center didn't appear out of nowhere. It was taught. Messily and perfectly, but intentionally. This show is very interested in how men become men, how boys learn to be good, or fail to. Arlen is an ideal, he's a drunk, he's a wanderer, but he gives Dunk something priceless, a concept of honor that isn't tied to blood. Yes, the humor remains aggressively crude at times. The show clearly enjoys bodily function comedy more than it needs to, but crucially, it doesn't collapse into Marvel-style quip fests. The humor usually serves as texture, not tone replacement. It keeps the world lived in. It reminds you these aren't mythic heroes, they're people who smell like sweat and meat. That's important in a story about knighthood because part of the point is the myth is a lie. The body is real, pain is real, dirt is real. Egg begins to emerge as more of a comic relief. His insecurities about his size and status parallel Dunk's doubts. They're both trying to prove something. Dunk is trying to prove he belongs in the world of knights. Egg is trying to prove he isn't helpless. That mirroring is why they work. They aren't opposites, they're echoes. Now Maekar's younger brother energy towards Baelor is played perfectly. Resentment, frustration, the feeling of being an afterthought. That, and Maekar, moment hits because it's so familiar. He's the brother standing in the shadow of someone everybody loves, and that resentment becomes fuel later, fuel for harshness, for desperation, for tragedy. The episode also makes a key political point. The Targaryens aren't arriving at Ashford for sport. They need to be seen. They need the realm to be reminded they still matter, still rule, still deserve fear and reverence. The dynasty is fragile. Respect must be performed, and the seeds of fracture are already visible. So episode 3 of The Night of the Seven Kingdoms is slower, but I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean it as a deliberate tightening of the screws. This episode isn't about spectacle, it's about exposure. It's about revealing who these characters really are, especially Aerion and Egg, and setting up emotional landmines that are absolutely going to explode later. So let's talk about episode 3 a little bit. Yes, this episode moves at a slower pace. There's less action, fewer big oh wow moments, and more conversation, more tension, more character beats. But what it's really doing is building the moral contrast at the heart of the story. On one side you have Aerion Targaryen, on the other side you have Egg, and this episode makes it crystal clear. They may share a name, but they do not share a soul. Episode 3 really leans into just how much of a piece of garbage Aerion is, and I love that they didn't soften him. They didn't make him misunderstood, they didn't make him charming, they didn't make him redeemingly nuanced. He's cruel, petty, entitled, sadistic. And the show does something smart. It doesn't make him cartoonish. It makes him believable. His cruelty feels casual, which somehow makes it worse. He's not raging. He's not screaming. He's just amused. That's what makes him dangerous. And if you're new to this world and haven't read the novella, this episode is probably the one where you start thinking, oh, this guy is going to be a problem. And then we have Egg, and this episode makes you feel for him. He's trying so hard to be a good squire. He listens, he works, he watches, he absorbs. There's a quiet sincerity in him. He wants to do things the right way, not because he has to, but he believes that's the way a squire should be. And what's brilliant is that we don't yet know the full weight of what that means. At this point in the episode, Egg just seems like a smart, earnest kid trying to prove himself, but there's something deeper there. There's discipline, there's restraint, there's thoughtfulness. And when you put that next to Ariane's arrogance, the contrast is sharp, intentional, and very George R.R. Martin. Can we talk about Ṛaymond for a second? Because he absolutely kills it in this episode. Every line dripping with anti-Targaryen energy is just perfection. The way he delivers his Targaryen hate speech, it's not over the top, it's dry, it's sharp, and it's hilarious. He feels like that one guy at a bar who has been holding on to a grudge for 20 years and is finally getting to vent. And what I love about it is that it grounds the world. The Targaryens aren't just dragon lords in history books. They are controversial. They are resented. They are feared. Ṛaymond's attitude reminds us that this realm isn't united in admiration. There's simmering anger out there, and that's important. Okay, and then let's talk about the reveal. Egg being a prince. I think for non-book readers, this probably hit hard, and the show handled it really well. They didn't over-dramatize it. They didn't blast swelling music. They let it land. And if you've read The Hedge Knight, you probably recognize how closely they lifted this from the source material. The dialogue, the staging, the timing, it feels very faithful, and that's something the show continues to do impressively. It adapts Martin's work with respect. The reveal reframes everything. Suddenly, Egg isn't just a good kid trying to learn knighthood. He's royalty choosing humility. He's a prince deliberately walking among hedge knights, and that choice says everything about who he is, especially when you compare him to Arianne. Same blood, very different men. One of the most satisfying things about episode 3 is how much it feels lifted directly from the novella. The tone is right, the character beats are right, even the pacing feels literary. But the show adds subtle layers, facial expressions, tensions in the silence, the physicality of certain scenes that enhance what was originally internal monologue in the books. That's the trick of adaptation. You can't just copy text. You have to translate it, and this episode does it well. Episode 3 may not be flashy, it may not trend on Twitter, it may not have had a dragon lighting up the sky, but it does something arguably more important. It deepens the characters, it clarifies the moral stakes, it shows us exactly who Arianne is, and it shows us exactly who Egg is trying to become, and by the end, you feel the tension building, because when cruelty and quiet honor share the same bloodline, that never ends peacefully. By episode 4, the tourney story stops being charming. This is the turning point. After Dunk confronts Arianne, he's arrested. Assaulting a prince is treason. Then Darren adds kidnapping. Double treason. And suddenly the tone shifts from awkward tourney adventure to, you can die because royalty says so. This is when the show becomes Westeros again, not as a spectacle, but as political cruelty. Egg's reveal is one of the most important character moments so far. There's no royal flourish, there's no gotcha twist, just guilt. Egg understands Dunk is in chains because of his name, because of the entitlement that comes with his bloodline. This is where you see the future King Aegon V forming: empathy, discomfort with privilege, awareness that the system he benefits from is evil, and the show deserves credit. It doesn't make Egg good because he's special, it makes him good because he learns. Baelor is portrayed beautifully, calm, just measured. He listens, he observes, he thinks before he speaks. When he rides out to be Dunk's 7th champion, it feels earned, not spectacle for spectacle's sake, just a good man choosing to do what's right. Baelor is one of the few characters in the entire franchise who feels like what the myth of nobility claims nobility should be, and the tragedy is, the world punishes men like him. Maekar is exhausted and furious. Watching him discipline Arianne and Darren is brutal and darkly funny, but beneath that anger is fear. Fear of losing control, fear of losing his sons, fear that his family is rotting from the inside. Maekar is not written as a cartoon tyrant. He's written as a man trying to hold a collapsing structure together with his bare hands. Now, the show does stumble occasionally. The fart gag during Dunk's search for champions undercuts tension more than it adds grit, and the missing "remember your vows" speech from the book is a genuine loss. That moment explains why knights rally to Dunk. Without it, the emotional logic relies relies more on viewer intuition. But even with those stumbles, episode 4 lands where it matters. Knighthood isn't a ceremony, it's action. Now episode 5 is the emotional crescendo. It's the point where everything the show has been building, Dunk's insecurity, Aang's awakening, Maekar's fear, Baelar's idolism, collides. The Trial of Seven is filmed brilliantly, not as clean choreography, but as chaos. Dirt in the eyes, confusion, combatants appearing out of nowhere. It feels ugly and exhausting, and that's exactly right, because the trial isn't supposed to be noble, it's supposed to be brutal. Westeros sells violence as honor, but the body knows better. Dunk takes real damage. He doesn't look invincible, he looks swollen, battered, barely standing. That vulnerability makes the eventual victory matter more. His heroism isn't about dominating, it's about enduring. That's the difference between Dunk and almost every other hero in this world. He doesn't win because he's clever or destined. He wins because he refuses to stop. The flashback to Sir Arlen adds texture. Seeing Arlen fight, drunk, singing dangerous, shows us the foundation Dunk stands on. It isn't refinement, it's stubborn honor. It's the kind of honor that survives hunger and humiliation, the kind that doesn't need applause to exist. Then, Maekar's desperate blow to Baelar. It isn't villainy, it's panic. And that's what makes it tragic. He doesn't set out to kill Baelar, he acts out of fear. Fear of losing another son, fear of the realm, fear of shame, fear of chaos. In Westeros, panic kills as surely as malice. Baelar's death is devastating. The dialogue feels lifted straight from the novella. The performances are restrained. There's no gratuitous gore, just grief. Baelar collapsing onto Dunk is visual poetry, a prince literally falling for a hedge knight. And when Dunk repeats "get up," holding Baelar's body, the show shifts from epic to tragic. Honor costs, and in Westeros, the best man pays the highest price. The imagery fits perfect with Daeron's dream, a dragon laying on top of Dunk. Now, episode 6 might be the most honest episode of the series. Everyone looks wrecked, because they should. Melees are not elegant. They are armored men smashing metal into each other. Dunk looks like he survived a medieval car crash. The physical realism grounds the show in a way few Thrones battles ever did. Then we finally get clarity on the long-debated question. Was Dunk actually knighted? The show answers, but also reframes the debate. A true knight finishes his stories. A meta jab aside, the real truth is, Dunk's knighthood was never about ceremony. It's about vows lived. Morally, he's already more than a knight than half the nobility. In this episode, Maekar becomes one of the most human Targaryens we've seen. The hug when he stops Aegon from killing Aerion, no shouting and no authority, just understanding, is deeply powerful. This is how dynasties fracture, not in explosions, but in grief and pride and sons raised wrong and fathers who don't know how to fix it. Now, Raymond Fossaway brings levity, blissfully incorrect about pregnancy timing, but radiantly happy. Lionel continues stealing scenes, and the subtle reference to Tarth remind us of Dunk's future legacy, Brienne's bloodline beginning here. The show is quietly reminding you, history is just not made by kings, it's made by the people that survive them. This episode ends in chaos. Aang gone, and Maekar panicking. Where the is he? Perfect. Not poetic, not noble, just fear, just love. And the quietest gut punch of all, Arlen's figure walking behind them, then veering away. Dunk no longer needing his master's shadow. He has purpose now, and he has company within Aang. Across the 6 episodes, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms accomplishes something rare. It stays faithful without being rigid. It expands without betraying tone. It balances humor with tragedy. It grounds politics and personal relationships. But most importantly, it understands its core theme. Knighthood is not armor. It is not titles. It is not blood. It is a choice. Dunk chooses over and over to stand where it hurts, and that's why this story works. It starts with a hedge knight burying his master. It ends with a man walking into legend. The road begins now. And if this is how they handle character, consequence, and the quiet emotional weight, then we are in very, very good hands.